So, Melba, I want to begin with a doctor's appointment you went to about 20 years ago that concluded on kind of a disheartening note. Can you explain what happened during that appointment?
So I already used glasses. I know I had a little bit of astigmatism, and I went to some 1 hour place, like Lens Crafters, I believe it was, or something. And I was waiting for my glasses, and one of the people in the office said, "Listen, while you're waiting, we have this new test. It's just $5. And since you're already waiting, do you want to take it?" And $5 for a an undergraduate student, it's affordable. It's one of the few luxuries I could give myself. So I was like, oh, well, if it's $5, I'll take it. And it was a test where they looked at your retina and they sort of measured your peripheral vision. At the time, I guess that was kind of new and exciting for them. So I was sitting in the office and they asked me to come in. And the one thing I remember most is the doctor's sort of somber expression after he had a chance to look at all his materials. And he said that I had this condition, which I never heard of, retinitis pigmentosa. And then he talked about the prognosis. See, because the name is already kind of scary, but then when you get to, well, it is an unpredictable, untreatable, incurable, degenerative condition. That's when I started getting upset because, see, when you're given a diagnosis of something that's going to really change your life, here's the one question most people have, I think. This is the question I have. When? When is this going to happen? And for retinitis pigmentosa, the answer is we don't know. It manifests itself differently in different people. So that day really changed things. But I have to say, I was kind of in denial. I was like, retinitis pigmentosa. This man probably don't even know what he's doing. He's a quack. So I told my parents, and my parents got really scared. My dad happens to be a physician, so then immediately they summoned me back home to Puerto Rico, and I must have gone to something like 12 different eye doctors, and they all immediately agreed with the diagnosis, but my dad wouldn't believe it. So that didn't help because it's one thing for me to be in denial and freaking out a little bit, but if my parents are feeling that too, and then they're wondering, well, did we give this to her? Is it our fault? So the process became more complicated because I had to accept the diagnosis, and my parents did as well. And it took maybe a year before I finally said, oh, well, I guess I do.
Did anybody in your family have this condition?
Nobody. They don't even use glasses. Because the thing with retinitis pigmentosa is that it is a genetic condition. However, the genes manifest themselves in some people, and in some people they don't. So somebody's a carrier, but the gene did not manifest itself in them. It manifested on me, and I have to deal with it, but nobody.
So, what is the current state of your vision? How do you see the world?
Well, retinitis pigmentosa, the way it evolves is you have severe tunnel vision. And so what happens over time is that your field of vision continues to become reduced until, for some people, it closes. Right now, I only have about 10 or 9% of the field of vision maybe you have. So it's becoming increasingly smaller. I like to think of it as a little peep show because when you have this condition, you are looking through this tiny little hole. You can see something, but it's through this tiny little orifice, and you don't know when it's gonna close for good. That's what happens. I look through this tiny little peephole, and I'm not sure how long I'm gonna have that, but I'm grateful for what I have, for sure.
Growing up, did you have any signs that you might have vision problems? Was there anything that you noticed that just seemed off?
I attempted to play sports at one point. I attempted to play volleyball, I remember. I was very excited. And I happened, for my small stature, happened to be rather strong in my serving technique. But that's about all I can do in the game because when the ball would land anywhere near me, I never saw it. But the thing is, I did not interpret that as a sign that I was lacking vision. I just thought I was bad at sports, and that's what I told myself. Later on, I attempted to drive, and this is just at the stage of practicing to get my permit. I got into at least 3 different accidents, and it was an issue of peripheral vision. I would collide with other cars because I didn't see them anywhere near me. And well, here again, I told myself, well, I'm just a bad driver, so I'm just gonna walk, I guess. So I did that. And then at night, I would notice I had trouble sort of getting around. One of the most distinctive features of retinitis pigmentosa is night blindness. But I thought in my head, because I'm smart, I said, well, it's night. Hello, that's why I can't see. So I found all these ways to sort of excuse this, and I never thought of it as a disability. What? No.
You mentioned that justifiably it took you some time to cope with the idea that someday you might go blind, completely blind. So how did you start to deal with that after that doctor's appointment?
I wish I could tell you that after that year I snapped out of it, but I didn't, because there's other factors that come into this. See, I was, and this is the way it goes for most RP sufferers or people who have RP. Usually the condition manifests itself in your 20s. So what's happening during my 20s in my life? I'm in a different country, going to university and living on my own. And I'm a tiny little thing in another country doing all of this. And so even though I knew now that I had this condition, I didn't want to announce it to the world because I felt that much more vulnerable. I mean, I'm already different. For one thing, I'm brown, I have this thick, and back then it was more, I have this thick accent, like, geez, now I'm gonna be blind too. And then there's the issue of being a woman living by herself, So, my vision was decreasing and I was stumbling places and all of that. But I didn't use a cane for years. It took me close to 10 years for me to even accept getting some kind of training. I was just trip all over, have bruises all the time. By that time, I'd also had begun to teach. And this is another place where I really hesitated to bring in yet another big difference between myself and the students, So I hid it from the students, and even if somebody raised their hand, which happened often, and I didn't see them, they just thought probably I was being rude. But I didn't feel like telling them that, in addition to that, I have this incurable thing. So it took me a long, long time. Years later, University of Illinois, now I'm doing my PhD. This is how long it took. They have a wonderful disability services office where not only do they help you with testing and issues like that, they have counselors who specialize in particular disabilities. So I had a vision disability counselor, and this man helped me finally come to terms with it. And he was the one who persuaded me to get my mobility training, and he helped me understand that having a cane did not make me weaker. It made me stronger because it allowed me to navigate the world in a safer way. So it took a long, long time, but thanks to their assistance, I finally came to terms with it and really embraced it.
Do you still keep in touch with that counselor?
I do. He's on Facebook.
Yeah.
He's retired now. But he's wonderful. And you know what else I do? I have an enormous picture of him in my office because, meeting Brian was a big, pardon the pun, eye-opening experience. This man, the first time I walked into his office, I thought he controlled the weather from that office. He had every manner of technological gadget at his disposal. He was born blind. And he was so efficient, and he was so busy, and you would be talking to him, he was like, hold on, I gotta answer my pager, hold on, I gotta, he's doing all of these things, and he changed my impression about what a blind person does and what they're capable of doing. So to this day, I have a picture of him to remind me that, anything's possible, really, as long as, you do have that determination to keep going.
You subscribe to an outlook on life called happy pessimism. Can you explain that?
This is a philosophical approach. It's part of what in philosophy we would term vitalism, as in, kind of a celebration of life, an appreciation of life. This particular iteration of vitalism comes from Mexican philosophers at the beginning of the last century. Here's the deal. It is called happy pessimism or pessimismo alegre, because you approach life from this vantage point. You realize that life is a struggle, and sometimes things won't get better. You're not an optimist in the sense that you think things are gonna get better. But what you do is you realize that even with whatever limitations and whatever catastrophes and whatever disappointments come along the way, you still have the choice to, well, be happy. And so freeing yourself from that kind of romanticism that things are just gonna be wonderful, it's very freeing. And I embrace it fully. It's sort of perplexing for people sometimes when I say I'm a happy pessimist, but if you think about it, if you become adjusted to the idea that, in life, it's really about adapting to what comes your way. You can't control what comes your way. You adapt to it. Well, then that gives you back some power that you can feel good about.
For those listening, you can't see him, but Chad is taking a nap right next to us with his bright Technicolor tie. So Chad is your guide dog. Talk about how you got involved with the guide dog program that gave you Chad.
Chad has become such an important part of my life, and there is a parallel. For years, people had told me, you know what, you should just get a dog. Why don't you just get a dog? But at the time, to be honest, I had this hesitation. And it sounds silly, but it really is what kept me from looking into this before. I thought, I don't want to have any creature, human or not, kind of be attached to me as though they are in bondage. I don't want to have just a creature that's just gonna serve my needs. That seems so selfish. So for years I was like, no, that's okay. I got this cane, I got this thing. And then I have more recently, and this is 2 years ago, I was talking to another counselor, and her father is blind. So this is one of the reasons I love talking to her, because she really understands lots of the anxieties that come with, a loss of vision. She says to me something I will never forget. She says, Melba, I know how you feel about how you want to treat other creatures and how much you respect their freedom and all of that, but hear me out. My dad had not taken a walk and felt free for years until he got this dog, and for the first time, and this is the part I'll never forget, for the first time he could just walk, feel the breeze hitting his face, listen to the leaves. He was free. He was free. And that resonated with me, because when you walk with a cane, you see, you rely on sound. And you have to focus all of your energy, by the way, in listening very closely, so you know what terrain you're hitting, so that you hear traffic, so that you hear where other people are located. So the idea that I could just walk, what? And it's not work? That stayed with me. So she highly recommended the school where I got Chad from. It's a very prestigious, very sought after school. So I thought, you know what, they're probably gonna say no, but I'm gonna just put in my application, and I did. And about 4 months later, they contacted me and started the screening process. And it takes a year for them to verify all your medical information and to do not one, but multiple home visits. You see, they want to make sure that they give these dogs a home where they're going to be comfortable, where they're going to be well cared for, and they want to give these dogs to people who are busy and engaged and living life. So going back to my motivation for not getting a dog at first, that made me feel better. The fact that I began to understand this relationship with a dog not as having like a servant, to you, but rather a partnership. And I was responsible for making sure he's happy too. And then that's when it became clear to me that this was the right thing to do.
Talk briefly, if you would, about the training that you actually had to go through with Chad. How was it building that relationship? What were some of the struggles that you guys had together?
It was really a wonderful experience. On a personal level, I'm in my mid-40s, and it is true that by the time you get to that age, sometimes, you kind of settle in your ways, and maybe you begin to be a little bit bored with what you're doing. Here's the upside of having a disability like mine, and going through the process of getting Chad, it awakened my every sense. Because now I've been teaching for 18 years, but now I'm a student again. And what I'm learning is so important, my life depends on it. So I gave every bit of effort and focus to being a student and learning how to be with Chad. So many things kept reminding me along the way and confirming I had made the right decision. For instance, we are trained at Guide Dogs for the Blind to really respect the creatureliness of this animal. And so I refer to my dog, when I give a command, I say please and thank you. Now, when I'm out there walking in the world now, people are perplexed. Why am I saying thank you to this dog? Now that I've been doing it for a few months, I'm not sure Chad understands what thank you means, but I think he gets that, and it reminds me that this is my partner. And he's giving up a lot of his puppy years to help me get around, and it reminds me to remain respectful and appreciative. So that was something really wonderful. One big challenge I had is I do have that 9% residual vision is what it's called. I had 5 other people who were also training for dogs in my class, and 2 of them were completely blind already, and they had a bit of an easier time because they could just trust the dog. You see, I have this residual vision, so it took me a minute to learn to trust him, not my own side, because I've relied on it all these years. So that has been the biggest struggle, letting him be in charge and not second guessing. And what I found is that when I do second guess him, I'm wrong because he can see better, he can see farther, and I can see a little bit, but my cane could not see for me. Chad does. And so imagine having to put that trust into another creature. That's also been transformative and challenging and wonderful.
How has it been bringing Chad into your classrooms?
It has been a revelation. I was apprehensive because I teach ethics, you see, which, keep it real, is not maybe the most engaging of all lecture material. So I thought, great. Not only do I have to compete now with cell phones and laptops and short attention spans, but now I've got a cute puppy in this room, and I've got to make these people pay attention to me, say something about Play-Doh. How is this going to work? So I was apprehensive that I was going to lose whatever little attention I get from the students. But actually the opposite has been true. I teach communications, so Chad has this effect on students that it makes them feel at ease and comfortable. And even if it's just sitting out in a corner, I've noticed they open up faster. It takes less work for me to get them to feel comfortable. So that's a dream come true for a communications professor. I do have the students called Chad, Professor Chad, because even though he might not be lecturing, he will teach you about love. And if you pay attention, he's always giving good lessons on that. It's been a revelation. It didn't make my job harder as I feared it would. It actually makes it a little bit easier in some ways. And let's not finally underestimate the power of showing that kind of vulnerability to students. And maybe this is connected to what I was discussing about being in the classroom and being a woman and being 3 foot nothing and having this big accent. At the time, I wanted to appear strong and authoritative. But what I have found after almost 2 decades of teaching at the college level is that vulnerability is actually a much better way to relate to the students. If they see that you too have your struggles, and I used to be uncomfortable with this word, but not anymore, they say they feel inspired. So they see me get up every day and show up and really be there, be present, and welcome whatever assistance is needed for me to do this job. And they feel like, wow, this is how she's gonna approach life, and whatever happens to me, I might emulate that, and maybe I will feel as happy as she seems to be.
Have you been taking any steps to kind of help raise awareness of the disorder?
I teach about 100 students a semester, and we do talk about RP. So I think I do raise lots of awareness there, and with every colleague I encounter, with every conference I go to, and they see me walking around with this dog or with my cane. So I do get to talk about what's happening with me all the time. And I do plan on maybe writing about my experience. I have a project planned on the sort of ethics around the language we use to talk about blindness. Because think about it. Is there any one instance you can think about where blindness is talked about as a good thing? Blindness, lack of foresight, having a blind spot, never. Blindness in conversation never comes up as a good thing or even an okay thing.
Why do you think it's so important to kind of flip that narrative around blindness and the way that people talk about it?
Well, it's very disempowering to hear something that you have being always discussed as a catastrophic, terrible thing. You know, this is something that Brian really helped me with when I first began to come to terms with losing my vision. You know, my native language is not English, it's Spanish. And in Spanish, when we talk about having a disease, we refer to it in terms of suffering from something. That's the normal way to talk about it. So for years, I went around telling people that I suffer from retinitis pigmentosa. Well, right in that articulation, there's a directive. It tells me how to relate to this condition, which is to suffer. So the more you suffer, the better you are at dealing with this thing. And I remember, earth-shattering moment, sitting and talking to Brian, and he said, you know, Melba, hold on here. I've noticed for quite some time now that when you talk about RP, you always talk about suffering from it. Let's try something a little different today. He said, why don't we just have it, just for today? Why don't we not suffer from it and just have it and just see what happens? That way of talking about having the condition already changed my thinking, because I thought, well, all right, so it's not the totality of who I am, it's just a part of me. It changed my thinking. And just in that way, all the different phrases and analogies and metaphors that we use that include blindness are very negative, and they kind of seep into, just like always talking about suffering from the disease, sort of seeped into my consciousness. This language does too. So I really want to find, I want to raise a critique of that and see if we can find a way around it. I hear it more actually now in my classroom, where students don't mean to refer to blindness in a negative way, but it is. That's culturally how we refer to it. So I went through that sort of epiphany at an individual level. If I can help to culturally affect some kind of change and help other people come to that realization, I think that would be a good contribution.
Do you ever at times feel like you have superpowers, like a spidey sense, because your vision's not at 100%, so any of your other senses are heightened because of that?
See, some people think that I say this stuff just to make myself feel good, but I don't. This is true. Here's what happens to me. My vision is decreasing rapidly at this stage, and my other senses are trying to compensate for this loss of vision. Absolutely, I feel I have superpowers, and the thing is, I discover them. So sometimes I'm hearing more than I did before. I sometimes hear things other people can't hear, and that shocks me, and that amazes me. I feel things that other people do not feel. Let me give you an example. Sometimes I'm walking around, especially at night, and I know how many people are walking behind me. And I can tell you roughly kind of what height and maybe what sort of weight. Not precisely, but I have a sense for what is out there. I'm surely not seeing it, and it's not necessarily something I'm hearing only. It's something that my senses are doing to help me compensate for the loss of vision. So what a wonderful thing to enter this stage of my life feeling indeed as though I'm developing superpowers, like that part on The Matrix where Keanu Reeves goes, I know jujitsu. So I feel like sometimes like the neighbors just drop their cell phone and nobody can hear this stuff. So what a wonderful thing. And I do have to pay attention, you see, because these are my new ways of seeing. And they are wonderful, and they are meant to help me. So I'm the only one who stands to lose if I don't pay attention.
Well, Melba, thank you so much for expanding on the story that was written about you in the magazine. You're truly inspirational, and I want to thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and chat with me again.
My pleasure, my pleasure. Thank you. And on behalf of Chad as well. He enjoyed
thanks,
himself.
Chad.
Look at it, took a nap.